September has been a mixed bag for Bitcoin, with price mainly just being quite boring and going sideways. But with Bitcoin currently sitting at some crucial levels, a turning point is just around the corner. Today we're going to be doing a roundup just to discuss Bitcoin's current market conditions, and as we can see for the month of September, it's been, as we said, a fairly mixed bag. We've basically just been sideways with the occasional dump before immediate pump back to the upside, or pump and then immediate dump back down. So we're sitting around $26,000, and as I said, not too much interesting has really happened recently. If we just go down a little bit here, we can see that the fear and greed index is currently giving a fairly neutral, maybe slightly fearful sentiment, but I think given a lot of people were quite bearish on September before this month started, just given Bitcoin's historically underperformance during September. Ultimately, the fact that we're up a little bit, especially given the fact that we've had, again, a pretty boring last few months in Bitcoin, ultimately isn't too bad. I certainly won't complain at price action that isn't going downwards. But if we just go to a few crucial metrics, we can see Bitcoin is actually at a pretty important point within its market cycle. Judging by a number of on-chain, mining, technical, market cycle indicators, we'll be able to see that Bitcoin really needs to make its mind up soon, whether we really need to kickstart in the next stage of the bull cycle, or if maybe we are going to see this lull just last a little bit longer. If we go to something like the MVRVZ score, which is just taking the realized price of Bitcoin, which is the average accumulation cost of all BTC on the network, subtracting that from the market cap and standardizing for standard deviation of volatility, we can see here that, again, we're out of the buy zone here, but I think what's potentially a little bit more interesting, if we just load this line up here, we can see that the MVRVZ score is sitting at this really crucial level where historically it's been a major turning point in the Bitcoin price action. We can see after this pullback here in 2014, this is where Bitcoin found some support before rebounding. And again, it's kind of struggled to break through in 2015, early 2016, at the tail end of that bear cycle, before again coming back down, finding support and really kicking off the next stage of the bull cycle. Again, here in 2018, this is where the MVRVZ score found some support before dipping into this buy zone and had a little brief pause here before breaking upwards on our run up to $14,000. And again, there's just multiple instances throughout Bitcoin's history of this being a really critical level on the MVRVZ score. And if we just, again, look at current price action, we can see this has caused the MVRVZ score to come down, retest this as support, where we actually had a little bit of a rally in price action, but it wasn't really sustained. It didn't really take us to considerably higher prices. It kind of just pumped us into a $30,000 resistance. But now we've retraced a little bit on this again, back to this key level. So it'll be really interesting to watch this play out over the next few weeks and months to see if we can hopefully rebound sort of in a similar fashion to what we did in the previous cycles, and hopefully don't dip beneath this and have a more sustained sidewards, potentially even downwards price action period for BTC. And again, if we go here to the R-HODL ratio, which is using a ratio of realized HODL wave values, the realized HODL waves, again, looking at the realized price, but the impact on the realized price that different age bands are actually having, which gives us a good indication at what point maybe retail are buying into the market, usually at the tail end of bull cycles, and when usually the more dominant buyers in the market are long-term holders, usually at the tail end of bear cycles. But once again, it's a very similar story where we're sitting at this really crucial level in the R-HODL ratio. That's really historically been a really crucial and key turning point for Bitcoin. Again, it's a similar story where we come up, find support on this level, or maybe break down, find resistance at this level. And this is really kind of in its own way an indication of when Bitcoin has really commenced the next stage of a bull cycle, maybe moved from the transitionary period from bear cycle into this sideways price action period into a bull cycle. It actually looks exactly like what we saw in 2018, 2019, where we broke down into this buy zone, broke above pretty quickly, but then had a really sustained period of sideways price action on this R-HODL ratio before actually kicking off again the later secondary stage of a bull cycle where we see more sustained positive price action. And once again, the Puell multiple, similar story. We see this line here at the 1.0 value level, which is, if you weren't aware of what the Puell multiple is, it's comparing the current miner earnings compared to a yearly historical average. So we can see if they're potentially earning less than they have over the previous year, or maybe a little bit more. But one indicates perfect equilibrium. They're earning exactly as they have done for the past year. And we can see This is another really key point for Bitcoin. We usually experience a little bit of a drawdown period once we've crossed beneath this line, and once we actually cross back above it, it indicates more bullish market conditions. But again, it's historically had a large influence on the deciding factors of the upcoming weeks and months for Bitcoin. If we can find some support on this and bounce upwards, great, it's likely to lead to a positive reaction in price. Whereas if we actually bounce into this line, go down even further in the Puel multiple and miners start earning less and less compared to the historical average, usually indicates that we may have a little bit more downside price action. And right now we're just flirting with this line, dipping temporarily beneath it before regaining it, but currently sitting pretty much bang on this 1.0 value in the Puel multiple. And once more, the net unrealized profit and loss is giving us a very similar indication. If we just look to this line that dictates between hope and fear and optimism and anxiety, we can see a very similar occurrence where Bitcoin really needs to make its mind up and kick off the later stages of a bull cycle, or unfortunately break down and give us some downwards price action. But I think just given Bitcoin's pretty low volatility period we've had for a few months and sideways boring price action, it's kind of to be expected in this transitionary phase, but it's just really kind of anticipating what the next move is going to be. I think because we're still above these key levels on all of these metrics, the momentum is definitely to the upside, especially if we look at something like the Crosby ratio, which is almost like a mean reversion tool. We can look for extreme periods of price action in the Bitcoin price. And we can see here, we actually rebounded from very close to this buy zone here, which is a pretty rare occurrence in the Bitcoin price, just at about the minus 13 value level, which again has been a pretty key level, and back above this 0 line on the ratio, which indicates historically that we're likely to see a more sustained period over the next few weeks of positive price action. Just looking at historical comparisons, this often seems to be the case, but we may come down and retest this line like we are doing on pretty much every metric to really kind of solidify. Maybe this is just setting the lower level of support before we can really build a foundation and build some buy pressure for a more sustained period of time to fuel a move to the upside. But if we look at something like the Fed balance sheet, again, we're probably a little bit more optimistic that the next move is going to be to the upside, just based on the fact that we're currently above these key levels on all of the metrics. But looking at something like the Fed balance sheet, which is a more macro perspective chart, looking at the traditional markets and economy, and this specifically the Fed balance sheet, which is the US central banks and how much assets they're actually purchasing or potentially distributing, we can see from pretty much exactly where Bitcoin's price peaked, this started to change to the downside. It was still positive for a little bit, but the momentum started to shift. And this really indicated that potentially the bear market had begun. And that was actually the case. But now we're actually seeing a little bit of a change in this. We're seeing not Fed balance sheet expansion, we're not seeing the purchasing of assets from the US central bank, but we're seeing the rate of decline decrease, meaning that it's potentially rounding off, and we're maybe going to see this slowly start to turn around, or at least just flatline like we saw in the previous 2015 into 2016 and 2017 cycle. If this is fairly neutral, it doesn't necessarily indicate bearish market conditions, but maybe it doesn't give us quite enough fuel to sustain an exponential sustained rally in the Bitcoin price, although we did see that in the previous cycle. So again, anything that isn't bearish when it comes to this metric is actually bullish. So if we start to see this climb back up, maybe flatline here, and we see the Fed balance sheet start to become a bit more neutral and less bearish, then maybe that will actually really solidify the fact that the latter stages of the bull cycle are imminent. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. And make sure to check out all the resources we've discussed today, as well as the many more that are all available on lookintobitcoin.com, your #1 source for Bitcoin information. So just to summarize, a number of key Bitcoin metrics are currently sitting at historically key levels, and these levels usually signal a turning point in the Bitcoin price. And September has been a mixed bag for price action, ultimately increasing slightly, but still within a quite tight range, awaiting a more sustained breakout, hopefully to the upside, but potentially to the downside. We do need to be open to all potential outcomes. And looking at short-term metrics like the Crosby ratio, there are some indications we may see some further bullish price action as we go into Q4, historically a good performing month for Bitcoin and digital assets, and especially considering Bitcoin fundamentals and macroeconomic conditions beginning to shift, like we saw with the Fed balance sheet. Hopefully, as all of these key levels are actually above these major turning points, like we said, hopefully finding some support that maybe all of these in confluence can actually kick off the latter stages of the next bull cycle. If you like this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can also consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to professional resolution charts, advanced macro and portfolio data tools, in-depth crypto industry reports, live and personalized indicator alerts, private TradingView scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And let me know what your thoughts are on the price action of Bitcoin currently. I know we had a bit of a mixed bag for September, but what are your thoughts on the coming weeks and months for the price action? Do you think we may get a bit of a bullish rebound, or do you think a bit more sideways or potentially even downwards price action? As I said, let me know both down in the comment section down below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.